You are watching Access LaPorte County Channel 97. Coming up next is the October 1st meeting for the Long Beach Town Council Workshop. You can find more information for this meeting by visiting www.accesslaportecounty.org.
Special meeting for this council workshop to discuss the budget is called to order. Meg, you want to take roll call?
Sure. Joy Schmidt,
Here.
Anita Remages,
Present.
Cindy Levy,
Here.
Colleen Lane,
Here.
Chief Swistek,
Present.
Clerk Collins, I am present. We have Trista, our advisor, who is also present. And that concludes roll.
Thank you. Meg, are you going to run
I
this
can-
meeting?
Sure. Okay, so two of the council members they attend our regularly scheduled budget meetings, but the rest of council, since you do not, we just have a few things we want you to understand and get across today related to various items. Biggest one being the budget, which is going to be approved at the October meeting, October 13th. But as you saw the agenda, we have a few other items that we're going to work through. The first being this SEA1 legislation. And we have Trista here today. I'm going to talk when I need to, and but since we have her, she will do much talking as well. So, and then we have the first, I guess we're not probably ready for that just yet, but
Yeah, no, that's fine.
council or yeah,
We've had several conversations along with the way already about the Senate Enrolled Act 1. I think that you're all familiar with it. I know specifically Joy and Anita have been involved, and I want to make sure that the rest of the council, and unfortunate that Kendra isn't here to ask questions today, but she's certainly willing, or she certainly can email them to me, and I'm willing to answer them for her, of course. If it was a phone call instead, that's perfectly fine as well. So the Senate Enroll Act, of course, downstate, passed last April at the close of the session. Are you both familiar some with it, or? Okay. All right, great. I'll jump ahead then to the specific effect that we perceive on Long Beach, which is, as you all know, because of the quantity of homes that are second residences and or possibly rentals, it changes the proportion of true homesteads that you have here in Long Beach. The overall effect of that is, yes, our property owners, true residential homes, owner-owned and occupied, are receiving an increase in their standard deductions and supplemental deductions. We're just going to call it their standard homestead deduction. Those will continue to increase under the present bill for the next 5 years. The effect of that then is that the net assessed value decreases, not the value of the property, but the net value of the property, which is what the taxes are figured on. You all have your gross value. That's where you can talk about resale value, that kind of thing. Your deductions are then applied. That is your net value on which your taxes are determined. No matter what the rate is, if that overall net value decreases, the town receives less money. Now, you are still entitled to receive the max levy, which we're going to talk about again in a moment, meaning there's a value that is set that the town can receive in property taxes. The effect, though, where this net AV drops is as the properties start to hit their tax cap, then that comes off your max levy, essentially, is really the fastest way to explain it. The additional factor then that you all will be facing is all of these secondary owned homes are actually in the 2% tax cap category. In the past, they have never received any kind of deduction to the property, meaning their taxes were determined on that gross value. However, this new bill adds a deduction for them. And this next year, they receive a 6% deduction. Now, that's much less than what a homestead receives, but it is a deduction nonetheless that has never been received before. So that means that the net assessed value for all of those will decrease, that the town has not experienced in the past. And that again flows into the revenue that you'll receive. The long-term unfortunate part of that is that it is set to increase under the way the statute is currently by approximately 6% each year for the next 5. So 6% for 2026, 12%. For some reason, then it's set to jump to 19. Don't know why that became an odd number. And then back to 6% increases after that. So looking ahead long-term, 5 years, that will become 30%, 33% actually by 2031, I think it is. Meg, why don't you talk really quickly about the count summary that you received with the auditor, and here's a copy.
So
in case you didn't
Trista,
print it.
our NAV went down drastically and she would have expected it to go up. So went down $10 million for next year, right? So we called Laporte, I think, I forget which office.
I'm
the
sorry, what did you
auditor.
say went down 10 million? Sorry.
Our net assessed value as a whole for the town. And we needed to know why. So we called them and she sent this NAV impact. It was a report, which I think we've all made the assumption that we're 50-50 of full-time versus second properties. For 25, the year payable 26, our property count is 1240. 2% deductions are 630 parcels or properties, which is 51%. Homestead is 528, which is 43%. The government, which is, I believe, town-owned, is 63 properties, which is 5%. Then they have an inactive assessed count of 14, which is 1%. So we're not, at least for this year, and then it's similar. She didn't give me the total for last year, but from the counts, it seems pretty similar. So we aren't really 50-50. We're more like 51-43, just so everybody knows. So that 2% that we're referring to is going to have an impact. That's a third of what we receive now by 2031 if they don't make amendments to it.
Mhm.
So
So the little teeter-totter page we created is just to help visualize, everyone processes and learns a little differently. So I thought maybe if we could give some kind of visual for that. The very top teeter-totter is 2025 presently. So the blue box, the net assessed value, meaning the value on which the town may collect property taxes, is 609 million, which resulted in an overall tax rate of 0.2408, just for your local town tax rate. Because the max levy you're allowed to receive is the 1.4 million there on the fulcrum. The max levy is allowed to grow each year. And moving into 26, by state statute, it's allowed to grow 4%. The state allows you to request more property taxes because they know inflation happens. So for 2026, we knew and we planned for in the budget that the overall collection you could seek was 1.5 million. However, because the net assessed value dropped based on what we were just discussing, again, they value the properties in 1 year and the taxes are paid on it the following because you receive the tax bills in May, due in June. The net assessed value dropped by 10 million down to 599 million. So doing the straight simple math calculation, that means the tax rate's going to go up. Now, it's not a lot, right? It's a penny and a half to 0.2546. But nonetheless, that pushes people closer to the tax cap. And this is only the little capture on Long Beach. Long Beach is part of the 2 townships that are within the boundaries of the town, the county, all the overlapping units, right? We can't do this kind of prediction for them because we don't know exactly what their budget will look like in regard to debt service and some other things, which is why we don't have a tax cap notation on this page. We just wanted you to see how the net assessed value and the tax rate correspond and relate with each other. So the bottom is if the net assessed value had gone up by just a modest 5% growth. Last year, I think we saw an 8% growth. But if we're a little conservative and if the value had increased instead, meaning if that 2% tax cap property, the secondary home property, had not received their deductions, then you see the tax rate instead would have correspondingly reduced, which would have moved people closer away from or further away from their tax caps. And so the effect of the town maybe wouldn't have been as bad. But this is the deck of cards we have. And so this is what we'll work with and try to respond. So I'm very glad that your communication with the lobbyists, with Chris Gibson, can continue. And that this is not a situation particular in Long Beach, of course, right? There are other communities along our lakeshore here by Lake Michigan, but there are also college towns, for example, that have a lot of rental properties, lots of little smaller lake towns all within the state that will have a similar effect as this on them. And so hopefully collectively there can be something addressed moving forward. But for right now, this is what we have and where we're at. So we just are trying to provide you with as much information as you can have so that as you communicate with residents, as you make your decisions here as a council, and as you have Chris speak on your behalf, you can demonstrate the true effect that this will have.
Can you go to the mic? Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. That tax rate going up, is that on autopilot or will the county have to make a decision relative to that tax rate? In other words, if that net assessed value goes down, like you show on your teeter-totter there, that max levy is what we're assuming it's going to go up to. But who influences that and when will that get decided as far as that particular tax rate relative to the max levy and or the max levy? Is that still in play or are those on autopilot?
The council decides each year to request a specific amount of tax dollars that they feel necessary to provide services, to collect, to provide services to the residents. You don't have to request the full max levy. If you decided that you were going to keep the tax rate level at a 0.2408, which meant the levy that you collected would go down, you have the opportunity to do that. It's not advisable because providing services to your residents is what's important. This is why you're a town, right? To provide services to your residents. But you could. You're not required to request that full 4% growth of the max levy. But you are the ones that make that decision. The state does not make that decision for you. They give you the opportunity to make the decision. But no, it's not just automatic. Okay. Are there any other questions on this early as it relates to the Senate Enroll Act before we get into the actual budget itself? Okay. And I guess I would encourage you all to decide what information you may want to put on your website. It's very robust. Is this teeter-totter example something that's beneficial? That's really for you. Well, you know your residents best. Is that something that could be helpful for them? I don't know that, that's a choice for you, but I have seen some other communities have also put up a little couple paragraphs explanation about how the current statute will affect them and the services they can provide. Right now, as you've talked about in your current budget, because you have been fiscally responsible, your balances are in pretty decent shape. And we are actually talking today about, should you afford a 3 or a 4% raise? There are other communities that are at 0 raise because they are affected maybe in the same situation you are, or maybe simply their overall effect with their tax cap is different and they're already there and they're going to lose a substantially more amount of money. So they can't even consider raises. So I do want you to understand that this is critical, and the long-term effect on you as we look forward into next year, that 12% increase, right? It may get worse if it stays as it is, but you do have the capability right now of still discussing raises. Your cash balances and your expected revenues can still allow you to make that kind of choice and that decision. So we're not at the cliff. I don't want you to feel as you walk out today that that you're walking off a cliff, but we want to make sure that we don't get there.
Personally, I think the more visuals, the better. I really do think people do like visuals. And I'm not sure if it opens up a hornet's nest or, for some people, but I think it's important that people know that we do have a lobbyist. I mean, there was a year, I think that there was not, people didn't want a lobbyist. And I do think it's important that our residents know, and again, it's just my opinion, that we do have a lobbyist who is specifically, overall, yearly looking at our, helping our town, but specifically addressing this issue. And that's just my opinion.
We have that financials area, so it's very easy for me to put some of this on there.
So looking then at the next two items in your packet, which are the major funds summary with a pie chart on it, and then simply just the fund summary. I think this is the first year. I don't remember if I proposed these last year for you or not. I think it's the first year that I've put them together for Long Beach.
No, I think we had.
Was it last year?
Yep,
Okay, I apologize.
we had them.
Oh, you're right, because we updated the, we updated the links. Again, just a visual way, mainly for you all to evaluate, are we spending our general fund budget? The pie chart is just the general fund. The majority, as you know, of your property taxes go to the general fund. Are we proportioning well the different expenses that we have in the different departments? And then just simply informationally, it's important for the residents to know that you're investing their property tax dollars heavily in the police department because public safety is important to them and to you, I would expect.
Trista, I'd like to add also for the police department, just for reference, to keep in mind that not only are we providing services to the town of Long Beach, but we also provide it to the Duneland Beach Association and the town of Michiana Shores, that we are their police department under police service contract that does bring in about $127,000 a year into our budget. So I know seems like we're the largest, but then again, we do provide to 3 different communities. So.
And in most communities, the police department and the town admin are the 2 largest, because the town admin then is not, of course, as you know, council salaries, right? It's health insurance, which is always a huge expense for your employees, insurance on the properties, your liability insurance, insurance on all of your vehicles, all of those kinds of things. Those are some big lump sum expenses that happen that fall under the town admin. We're looking in this next budget to parse some of those health insurance, for example, out to the different departments. And so next year's pie chart will probably look a little different, just because some of the departments then will have those insurance costs attributed more directly to them. It's not that you've chosen to spend or allocate money differently, because the expenses are all still there. It's just a way that they'll be organized. But then the other funds in between our kind of blue line headings below are the other and various tax funds that you receive. So going down the left side after the general fund is over, and you will see, by the way, a reference, that difference column are the differences associated with the current 26 budget that you've looked at to propose for this year, or that is proposed that you look to adopt at your next meeting, to show that you have cut some of that budget back to respond to this expected property tax impact that you'll be receiving fewer revenues than this year. So then back to the left side column. Below the general fund is your motor vehicle highway fund. It does not receive property tax dollars. I'm sorry, receives some property tax dollars, but also the gas tax. Parks and Rec is funded in part by your property tax dollars, which is why that has a small cut associated with it as well. Your CCD fund is property tax, but it's determined on rate alone. It's a little different and outside of the teeter-totter that we talked about, which is why that was allowed to stay level. And then CDIT and public safety are both currently funded by local income taxes, economic development income tax and public safety income tax. Those are addressed in the current Senate bill as well. They are set to end as of the end of 2027, meaning you would still collect the money in 28 because they collect it 1 year when you all pay your income taxes and then distribute it to the government units the following year. But as you know from the bill, every council will need to vote by the end of 27 on whether or not to renew and establish a new income tax for the following year. As you might recall, though, the current legislation, and I have a kind of a side remark about it, but any community under 3,500 in population won't be able to vote on their own income tax. And so, I'm just going to say it because I've said it already. What's the difference? Apparently, you're not all smart enough to make your own choice, is really the effect I feel like it has. And it concerns me because I just personally feel like you should be allowed to do that. So anyone under 35, yourselves, Trail Creek, Potawatomi Park, all of these small little communities, the county, LaPorte County, will vote in 27 on whether to impose an income tax that will cover all of the small communities. The county is allowed to keep 75% of that. So if they go ahead and vote to impose the full 1.2 that's presently allowed, the county can keep 75% of that. I think the reason for that is because the entire county's population will be paying it outside of the cities. Michigan City won't contribute to this 1.2. I don't mean to confuse anyone on that. So all the rural and smaller towns, all of the residents will pay that. So the county then will keep that 75% to provide services to the rural unincorporated areas. And then the rest of you all will get to divide out the remainder of that 1.2%. Yeah, so whatever conversation needs to be started now with your county officials to discuss how important that is for you all to not lose the availability of receiving that income tax, both in CDIT and LIT, is going to be really important. Question? Okay. Not now, at least. Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand one thing. Not only are we getting affected in terms of our mix of residents and non-residents on the property tax side, we get no income from non-residents either. So any of these income tax issues relative to our particular situation, meaning half of our homeowners, or better, more than half our homeowners do not live here full time. They also don't pay any income tax in either of these categories.
That's right.
So we're further burdening essentially full-time residents as this process moves along. So that 30% drop in the assessed valuation for the renters and part-time property owners, the burden that will become greater for full-time residents. So I think that's part of the argument that with Chris Gibson and the county, then when we start talking about income tax, maybe we just need to make the county council aware of our situation a little more broadly so that that's part of their thinking in terms of what decisions they make relative to the income taxes.
Well, and that kind of factor, I think, drastically affects your conversation you should be having with your county officials, because you're not in the same situation necessarily about that, your resident population, as Trail Creek, for example. They're also a client of mine. And so I don't mean this to say that, you know, I want you two to be fighting over the dollars, but your situation is different than theirs. And you then, to protect yourselves and your residents, need to make sure that you're reminding the council as they go to consider whether or not it's imposed and when it is, what proportion each town receives. This is one of the factors that hopefully they will give, they will give evaluation of, at least. When it comes time for that, then we can try to help run some numbers and give some suggestions for you on what that looks like. Right now, the statute is set up that by July 1, I believe it is, and we'll double check as it gets closer. But by July 1, you have to notify your county commissioners and council that you want this, that you want to be included in the distribution. When they make their decision, though, they are not required to only give it to the communities that requested the distribution. They could decide to give it to others. But it's definitely in your best interest to make sure that you do make that request of them. So we'll have a lot more conversation about this. And if some amendments are made, maybe this all changes and maybe this is wasted breath today, but if it doesn't, I just want you to be as informed as you can be. Back to the pie chart then, the bottom left is the community center fund. That is operated based on the, as you know, the revenue that they collect. And then the general fund kind of supplements some of the capital rehab type improvements and things. The lighter blue color on the right side, local road and street, is funded solely by some gas tax, which is why it's off on its own. And then, of course, your water, stormwater, and garbage are funded by the fees that are charged to the residents. And so there are no taxes that go into those last three, but it's important to show because those are some major revenue generating funds based on your town fees. It's just great to have them all on one page here, one piece of paper. The second one then, the fund summary, was just so that in one place, you could look on one piece of paper, all of the funds that are presently put into Gateway, which is the DLGF state website portal to communicate to the state what you want your budget to be for them to approve it. It's also available to the residents from a forward-facing public side. And I think that the link to that is already on your website, but we can double check that after the meeting. I think last year already Meg put that link up, but we can double check. So you see then the revenues that we're predicting, again, a little conservatively, just so that we don't have you feel like we promised you that you're going to receive too much money coming in, but the revenues are a little conservative. For example, the casino riverboat, you really do on average receive 72,000 a year. The county, though, isn't always consistent in when it's given to you. We believe it's supposed to be each quarter, and sometimes that doesn't quite happen, so then you'll receive a catch-up payment. If you look back at the fund projection history that you have been given before, you see one year you received, I think, 120, the next year you got 40. And so we just, again, want to be a little conservative in the revenue part. And so you'll see all the way down. The general fund, those revenues do include the property taxes and the miscellaneous revenues that you receive. So all of the revenues that you bring in from the extra police contracts to your building fees and permits, the golf cart licenses, all of the various things that you collect, most of them come into the general fund. As you look across the page, then the expenditure column, almost in the middle, just right of center, are the current budget numbers that we have presented at the first reading. And then you have whether that's, a positive or a negative projection for yourself. And we'll come back in a moment as to a few of those negatives and if that's advisable or not. Then just to give you some current fund balances as of August 31st. These are the cash values that you had in the various funds that will match your financial reports that Meg gives you. And then pulling from the fund projections, the very far right column, if the rest of the year stayed on current trend with revenues and expenses, this is where you may end up at the end of the year in cash. Of course, the property tax draw comes in December. And so the general fund has a nice healthy balance of 935,000, which is in place though for you to spend then from January to June until the next tax draw comes in June. But that's a great healthy balance. The fact that you have already on paper before the miscellaneous revenues come in next year, half of next year's, actually a little bit more than half of next year's budget puts you in a really good spot because we know all your bills will be covered. So that's fantastic. You won't have to do any kind of temporary short-term borrowing of any kind because you have enough money there to get you through. So that's great. What I mentioned earlier about you're not at the cliff. If this number were only 200,000 instead of the 935, we'd be in cliff mode with parachutes on. So you're nowhere near that situation.
Trista, if I can just add too, from our last conversation on budget and finance, we met with the department heads and have asked them to kind of minimize their spending through the rest of this year to hopefully go towards the end of the year where we're not running, this year's budget to its full max. So there'll be some additional funds left in this year's budget as well. That'll go towards our, overall fund balances. And they've been good about that.
So I'd like to spend some time on the fund summary, if we could, for a few minutes, which will help you be best informed when it comes time for your second reading and budget adoption. To start with, the Casino Riverboat Fund at the top, the column I kind of skipped over a moment ago is the part in yellow, the additional cash for capital plan. The Casino Riverboat is money that you receive from one of the taxes on people that engage in the gambling at the riverboat, right? The boat in Michigan City gets one kind of tax from the gaming, and then you get the other. It's a miscellaneous fund. It's used for some of your CCMG match over the years. It's used for some of kind of the miscellaneous things that come up here and there. I think currently we have budgeted in it the lobbyist as an annual expense. And it functions well. The other expense is some capital. Right now we have 16,500 for this next year. As that money then is not spent, it kind of works as, in one regard, as a rainy day fund as well. The cash continues to build from one year to the next. The 50,000 is in yellow because right now in our capital plan, we have for 2026, the availability of using some of that cash towards some of the capital items. And as you'll see, the fund balance isn't tremendous as of August, but even with planning and to use some capital, you still have some balance at the end of the year. I'm perfectly comfortable with the way that's budgeted and planned to be used. Perfectly comfortable that you'll be able to, and that the DLGF will approve it. The rainy day fund then has an expenditure listed of 20,000. You see that we have no revenue attributed to it. As we did at the beginning of this year, we transferred from the general fund some of the extra cash that you had into the rainy day fund to start to build that balance. It's forward-looking for a couple reasons. The current balance that you show listed of 303 as a place to start to build potentially some cash if there is some kind of financial settlement requirement with the Michigan City Sanitary from the prior project that failed. And also just, you need a place to plan for some emergencies. If there is something that happens structurally in town, you've got to have a truly a rainy day fund, an emergency fund. But to be able to budget a little bit for it in the current budget as a placeholder, in case there was some emergency, you easily then could say to Marcus, town administrator, okay, yes, here's, $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 for this emergency that you can use. If you don't put a budget number in, leave it at zero, then when that emergency arises, you would have to go through an additional appropriation process with council that takes typically 2 hearings. Now, of course, you can suspend the rules and do it in 1 hearing, but you still have to get to that meeting, which is either a 48-hour notice for a special, if you can get everybody coordinated, or the next regular monthly meeting. So to have a little bit planned, just as a reserve emergency spot, is a good idea. So that's why that's presently there. The projected year-end balance, I'm at a loss for a moment on why it's 180.
I think some
I'm going to double check on that for you because that doesn't sound right to me.
our budget's only in thought.
I'm going to double check that one. Okay, so sticking along the additional cash for capital plan contribution column a moment, the next yellow box then is the general fund. Right now, we have in the capital plan $30,000 as a placeholder out of the general fund as revenue reserved for capital items. I've got this in the yellow and then kind of that red font right now because I want you all to think about, do you want to use more of the cash balance toward anything else in next year's capital plan, which we're going to talk about later in this meeting? You do have some room, as you see, in your current balances that you could contribute some more if you needed to. You also can keep the capital plan with the current 30. And if something arose during the year where an expense came in higher than you expected, you know that you've got some room to come back to the general fund as your safety net area that you could still contribute more. The 40,000 for the local road and street is in the current capital plan toward paving contributions. The park and rec, we're going to skip over for just a moment in that yellow box and come back to it. And at the bottom, the stormwater of 130 was, again, in the capital plan already as a placeholder for the upcoming project for next year with some of the infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure as related to some of the paving projects above ground. Back to the park and rec yellow spot. It's yellow because, as you'll see in the capital plan a little bit later, and as you all know, there's discussion right now about a large improvement that they're proposing with the pickleball courts. And the fund itself has a very, very healthy cash balance. And so as we look at the capital plan later, this yellow is a reminder for you all to start thinking about what contribution maybe could come from that fund itself as we move forward. Before we move off the fund summary page, then the other place I wanted to look at quickly was the community center line. You see that it's the only one in the far right column right now that at the end of the year may have run out of money in the fund. So this is simply a reminder that we need to be careful, and I know Meg is watching it very closely already. This is simply a reminder to be very careful that as some of their additional improvement projects come in, that we don't use their fund because they've expended their revenues for this year, keeping some reserve though for their electricity bills. The rest of the operational costs are still planned through December. But if they were to continue on the current trend of the improvement projects from the fund, they would end up negative. So those other expenses, which have been approved and discussed, the various improvements they're making, just need to be paid from the other funds, such as casino or seated or general. So I don't want you to freak out by the red. It's just simply, again, that reminder of being watchful.
And I'm going to be reclassing a capital expense out of community center. So, which is how we planned everything. It's just simply operational money versus capital. So some of their lines similar to MVH, which we'll discuss later on, but they're not as clear cut as being an operational line versus a budget line. Sometimes they're kind of used for both. It's not a problem.
Meg, one of the things the community center committee will be looking at some of the upcoming meetings is an increase in rent for 2026. As you know, the utility bills for July and August, since the electrical rates have gone up, were quite hefty. We've seen a drastic increase. So we're probably going to be looking at a minimum of a 3 to 5% increase in rent for our tenants. And then we'll bring a recommendation back to the council for consideration and a vote.
Do you expect that most tenants will be able to? No. Do you expect that most tenants will renew their lease despite the increase?
One I'm concerned with, because that individual's been behind on rent from time to time, but has continued to stay with us. I think there's some other concerns going on as well, but otherwise, I think for the most, a 5% increase would be roughly $25 a month for them. So we'll get some feedback from the committee, but I believe most of them will stay with us.
Okay.
So. And we have the new tenant that actually just moved in today.
Oh, great. Does anyone have any questions on those two documents or conversation that you want to have about them at all? Okay. So then the next two are the budget worksheets. On the agenda, Meg has these obviously as the employee raises. What I did for you is pull out in the general fund, which is the single page. And then the 2-page document that's stapled are the miscellaneous funds, and I'll try to walk through what you're looking at here. The general fund single page, at the top, toward the left, you'll see the notation of 3% and 4% at the top of the columns. The 4% 2026 proposed column, the leftmost column of the yellow, is what's currently listed and advertised for the budget. We already had advertised the full 4% raise. Again, it's important when we advertise the budget that we advertise a little bit high, because you cannot increase to the budget later, but you can always decrease. But knowing that we've got some uncertainty fiscally moving forward, it's important for the council to make the final decision on the raises and if they can be afforded, keeping in mind what your HR committee has recommended. I just always want to caution the HR committee doesn't have necessarily the full financial overview and information that you all do. So I wanted you to see, if you granted only a 3% raise for your employees, what that would look like financially for the town, how much it would save for you then to make your best decision looking into the future on what's coming down the road. In the general fund then, the bottom right-hand little blue box, $4,861 is the overall difference between a 3 or 4% raise in the general fund only. And the lines that you see here are those people that are affected, which are the clerk treasurer's office. The town council is listed as the general fund, but there's no raise contemplated at all for you, but I wanted you to be able to have that there in case residents asked. And then building inspector, the two orange, building inspector and the building department, building commission clerk. And then you have your police officer staff below that. There, of course, with the raise itself, are implications with Social Security and PERF contributions on the town's contribution side. So those are the gray boxes. And I'm sorry, the font is a little bit small. I should have maybe hidden a couple columns on the left. to give you a little bit better eyesight view there. But general fund then is the 4,008. Looking at the 2-page document, that encompasses then at the top of page 1, the Park and Rec Department, which for the most part are part-time wages and not really affected by a 3 to 4% difference, except that the town admin has some salary there. Wow, I apologize. My coloring notation here didn't fall through as well. Excuse me, let me start over. Goodness gracious. The very top 6 lines are the MVH fund. It's everything above the lighter green line. You see MVH is kind of in the middle in the light green. Town administrator is paid partially salary there, and then the wages superintendent is your MVH, your street department superintendent. He would be affected by also the 3 to 4% difference. The second orange, your laborer, just recently received, if you remember, an increase in his hourly rate to 24. And so it would not be contemplated that he would receive a raise for this next year because as a new employee, that was just recently determined. But then the town admin and the street department superintendent are affected with social and perf. So just for the street department, it's $995 difference from 3 to 4%. Then below that is the Park and Rec, which is only the town administrator, because your Park and Rec department is mostly part-time salary, part-time wages. But there are some small Social Security and perf implications there. Right in the middle then is the Lit Public Safety Fund. The bulk of the salary for Mark is in this fund as the chief marshal. So there is a small implication to that fund for 4% difference. And then the bottom of this first page is the water fund, where your top line, both the water department crew are in that first white line, and then some clerk treasurer salaries below that. All of the clerk treasurer's office staff is divided in different proportions between some of these funds. The bulk is in the general for the town side, the bulk is in water for Diane. But then as you see on the following page 2, there are some wages assigned both to stormwater and garbage because they work on collecting those revenues and sending those bills out as well. So page 2 is the small calculation for those small differences attributable to the salaries there as well. Some of the street guys' salary is paid out of the garbage fund, a small portion, 10%, I think. Collectively then, the bottom of page 2, right side blue box, all of these other miscellaneous funds, the difference in the 4% raise would be $5,098. So overall, you're at just over a $10,000, just under a $10,000 difference. Is that substantial? Not necessarily to the town. Could those amounts be substantial to your employees? Sometimes. If all of the difference was to the general fund only, because we have the circuit breaker expectation of $50,000 less revenue coming in, I would be concerned, but it's not. You see it spread out among several funds. So I guess simply what I wanted the result of my comments on this to be is, you know what's coming forward. I wanted you to have these values so that you can make the best informed decision. I think overall, either decision will be okay. But we'll have to have the same kind of conversation next year at this time, based on whatever may or may not happen downstate. So whatever decision you make, I think it's just important to convey to the employees that We don't know what next year looks like yet. They know that you try to give raises each year. But just be open and honest about, next year's decision has to be a next year decision, that you don't want them to expect it simply based on this year's decision. Now, there are some communities I mentioned earlier where they can't afford a raise. That is a big talking point for them downstate to say, this has affected our employees personally, right? Not only can we not give the services to our residents that we want to provide, but also now our employees have to take a hit. I'm not suggesting that you make this decision based on the ability to make that statement. But I do think it's important, no matter what your decision is, that you let Chris Gibson know that next year you may be in a situation where you can't afford them, so that he can include that in his conversation. So that's my information and soapboxing for a moment, I think, on that topic.
Are some people waiting until April? Is that worth mentioning?
Sure, yeah. Because the legislative session is short, meaning they don't start till January and they're typically wrapped up around March, I think. But also because the true circuit breaker number will be released in April. Once any of the assessed value appeals are worked through, the true circuit breaker number is always released toward the end of April from the state, from the DLGF. So that's when we're truly going to know how much of the expected reduction will actually happen. We do have some communities that are waiting until then and telling their employees, who are in a little bit different situation than you, but nonetheless, they're waiting and they're letting their employees know in April, when we see the number, we're going to evaluate. If we can afford it, we'll look to do a back pay. Maybe it's a bonus at that time. Maybe it's a quarterly bonus then for the rest of the year. But they're waiting to see the true number come in until that time. I don't know that you're quite in that situation, but it absolutely is an option. You are allowed to, as long as it's truly reflected in the salary ordinance what you're doing, you would be allowed to in April or May give a retroactive payroll check, for example. Or at that time, give a bonus that would equate to what they could have earned in those first couple months. So you do have several options available in that regard. Okay, no questions on that. So the park board fund kind of really relates to the capital plan. We may as well have the capital plan in front of us as we look through that. This document, of course, you've seen before. Meg has gone through and then reviewed with me as well to really try to make sure that the actual expenditures toward the left-hand side there are as up to date as real time. And I think we've got everything listed now for you to see what's been spent so far this year. You still have projected expenditures in 25 because not everything yet has been completed. Or you have some things that just weren't due for payment yet, such as in the police toward the bottom, the squad car lease is paid every May and November. So we've only spent for that first squad $9,700. There's $20,000 planned because the other payment is still coming due later yet this year. Toward the bottom, the interest on the building court bond. Again, one part is due in June, the other half is due in December. And so there's still money expected to be spent yet for 2025, and you see the total at the bottom. You may not actually get to spend a full 2.8 million if some of the other projects are not completed. For example, in the community center, they've spent 46,000. We have planned that they may spend up to 100 using some various different funds to cover that expense. If they don't end up spending a complete 100 on improvements, then that money just stays in the different cash balances of the different funds. And then maybe that expense happens next year, for example, in 26. The reason for the different colorings are so that other than the orange is just to highlight where your CCMG monies are being spent, both from street and then the stormwater proportion. So that's on the left side. The right 2/3, all those colorings, the blue indicates water, the purple is street department and stormwater. Those then match the color on the revenues, which are page 2. We can only use street department money on street projects. We can't use street department money that's collected from the gas tax or the property tax from that to pay for a fire truck, for example. So the color is there just to try to see the dedicated revenue for certain things, and then the more miscellaneous revenue stays just in the white standard kind of coloring. The CCMG grant money in the lighter yellow can only be used, of course, on the CCMG project. But it's important to list both the expense and the coordinating revenue there so that it's included in your overall plan. As an example, the salt barn on page 1 toward the top is in the blue with the blue outline, 150,000. It's under the street department because that would be an improvement for them, you know, in the town property area there. And on the revenue side, we do have 50,000 in the MVH fund and 60,200, both in that same blue coloring that we can use out of the LRS fund. It is an appropriate expense for those two funds to contribute toward the salt barn. But you do note that the 50 and the 60 only equals 110. And right now, the estimated expense is coming in at 150. So in this example, the other 40,000 that is needed would come from one of the white rows, the CCD budget or the CEDA budget. Those are both white at the top. Or the riverboat fund at the bottom. On the revenue side, while I'm talking about the white rows, the lit public safety tax is not colored, but it is a very reserved revenue only for public safety. The reason it's not colored is because that can go toward police or fire. And because we just have a couple different places it can be used, it was hard to assign with some coloring notations across the different police car leases and some of the fire department financing on the fire truck. So I didn't want those to be out of balance by putting a color there, but. So moving into then the bottom of page 2, you see the shortfall or excess of the overall plan. For the end of 2025, with the revenues listed here that are reserved revenues for these things, against the currently listed planned expenses, you would end the year with $112,000 of excess revenue, which is fantastic. Because next year, moving into 26, if you were to spend everything listed against the revenues that we know we have, again, these revenues listed are outside of your operational costs. These are revenues reserved or cash balance reserved just for these more major capital items, not for diesel fuel, not for payroll, none of those kinds of operational things. If you were to spend every penny on every project listed in the expense on page 1, you would be $345,000 over your revenue for 2026. Now, if you ended this year with 112 extra, applied that next year, that's good. You'd be down to a value of 230.
Trista, In that year, though, it looks like the tennis courts are in there.
Well,
for
that's where I'm
250.
headed right now.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good.
So below that in red, you see a value of 325,000 on page 2 at the bottom. If you look to page 1, there are 2 values in red also font. Right in the middle, the tennis court rebuild is showing at 250,000. And then town signs are listed in red at 75,000. I wanted to identify for you 2 places that would be I don't know what I want to call them. I'm going to use the phrase, I guess, less important. And I don't love the phrase because I don't mean to minimize the value that people see in these things. They are very valuable, and I know they're important projects. I'm just trying to compare them to the need for the new fire truck, the need for the new police car, the need for the road paving, the need for the water valves. If we had to rank our projects, I'm just suggesting that maybe those 2 items, since we don't have the immediate available funding for them, might be the first ones to consider on, could they be funded by something different? So that's why those are in red. And if in fact you did not use them in this capital plan and found other funding for them, and this year, because you did have some extra revenue, the rest of your capital plan would be sustainable. And that's really what this document is meant to give you, is the availability to make your decisions, obviously informed, and is it sustainable? If this shortfall at the bottom was $500,000 or $600,000, then we would be talking about, should we be planning to pave as much as we are for next year? You know, then it increases to a larger list of things of what can we and should we afford. And so along the same lines, then in 27, the red font is listed as 100,000 on the town roof. And I'll let Mark speak to the details of it, but it might be that maybe that project has to be deferred until 28 or 29. As you're looking at right now in 27, the fact that we have a shortfall predicted.
Mark,
We will be fine because we have to remove the $120,000 police boat from. So that'll come off because we have that in 27. So that 120,000 for the police boat will come off. The town roof, I met with the contractors that are doing the roof repairs currently. They estimate we're in a 5 to 7 year window. They're saying they think at least 5 years, no more than 7, the current roof will last. So I think, you know, we could move into 2028, 2029 for the roof. And that will probably be at least $100,000 expenditure for the roof.
Okay. And right now in 27, the police boat is listed both as an expense toward the bottom of page 1 and as a separate police donation line of 120. So it does net to 0.
Okay.
So, but moving the 100 out would get you to a shortfall only of 17,000, which is very manageable. Again, the general fund is only set to contribute for 25, 30,000. You'll see on the revenue that the general fund is in yellow and red font at the very top, because not knowing what the future looks like with SCA1, I didn't want to suggest that you should continue the 30,000 from the general fund, if in fact you might need to keep that for operational expenses. So the future years of this capital plan are always, it's living, breathing. It's always in flex. But it's the best plan that we have right now. Will it change again in December? In December, we'll know the current expenses from this year. So yeah, we constantly are updating it.
I just, Trista, just on the park board, I think at the last, I forget when it was, they were talking about stop 29, the repairs there. And I think that was something that was kind of, I don't want to say, well, it was a little bit of a surprise. And I think
so
to you, too about that it was going to be a much more expensive project than even they thought.
So if they are still working on quotes, I believe, and
They are,
exactly
yeah,
what
and
needs
he
to be
said they
done.
got a second one that was even higher than the first one, which they
Right,
were.
so it depends if the project stays, if it's 85,000, they have enough mostly capital plus some operational that can cover it.
Okay,
They definitely have enough in their balance to cover it, no matter what the cost is. If it's 110, then we're out of their range of, and if it gets completed this year, this may move into the next year as well.
Yeah.
So then they would have what they don't spend in capital this year plus their new capital balance. So
okay,
it's not listed on here as a project just because until we know the final number, it falls mostly within their range this year, considering they've only spent 12,000 or so. The only other item I'll add is CCMG. We are more than likely not paving next year. So you'll see
Yeah.
that 800 in yellow is the match from the state, or it's not the match, it's the grant money. We've got 200 in engineering, which we actually increased from 15 to, I believe, 20%. And we have our 20% match because the state changed it. It's no longer 25% match. It's an 80-20. So 80% is the 800,000. Our 20% is that other 200,000. We may not be spending that match next year. We may have to spend more on engineering than 200. We're unsure of where the bulk of that engineering cost will fall. There will be engineering each year that we pave, but there's also potentially more engineering with it being Lakeshore Drive and the other considerations that have to be thought through. So that's going to affect this plan for next year as well. Now, we don't want to just go and spend that 200 because we're going to need it as we pave each year.
Yeah, we need to reserve that.
Right.
Just address that real quick. So we met with Haas yesterday, Mark and I, he just stepped out, but he'll be right back. So two pieces of information for you guys. One, in the event Lakeshore Drive, the council is going to have to decide how we handle Lakeshore Drive in terms of what the scope of the project is. You got some preliminary numbers, I think. So all those decisions need to happen. If we want to do what we would like to do as the Public Works Group, would be to start that project in 27. So we would have the CCMG grant process, what they call calls, which means when you put in an application, the first opportunity for us to do that is July of 26 for a project that would likely occur or start in 27. To be able to do that call, meaning to put an application in 26, we would have to be making decisions in December about scope of work on Lakeshore Drive, because the preliminary engineering, or really, yes, the engineering that would be required to make that application to start the Lakeshore Drive project would have to start in January. So you don't have a lot of time. We can push this forward, don't get me wrong. But I think as you think about how you want to do this, particularly relative to these numbers that we're saying, you need to be thinking about, and we're going to present more detailed information to you. We're doing some coring and some other things to give you more details in November, such that in December, we could maybe have a workshop maybe in November for the public so that we can keep everybody informed. But you're probably going to want to make some hard and fast decisions by December. Whether you go forward or not is the major global decision. And then what the scope is and what you want to commit to for your 3 or 4 year program or whatever we decide. But you do need to be thinking about that kind of a time frame because of the restriction of the call date and the amount of engineering that has to happen in order to make that application. Okay.
Before you leave, I haven't dug into the more specific details of CCMG. When we do this next application for Lakeshore, I presume that it includes reference to the size of the project and the number of years it will take. As
We will
opposed
define the
to,
project as we see fit. It's got to stay within $1 million for any of the calls. that
Year.
we want. Per year, yes.
okay, but my question is, when we start it, we know that we need that match to complete the project. We need the grant. So do they, while maybe not deciding on the call the next year yet, do they give some indication of the fact that, yes, next year's grant, or are we just hung until,
There's some risk that this program could go away. I can't answer that. We can ask Haas to ask the NDOT, or we can even ask them whether or not they will tell us, yes, we think you've got a 3-year commitment or a 4-year commitment. I don't know that they'll do that for us.
yeah, that's what I
It'd be
expect.
nice to know that.
I don't think the program will go away. I think the state, I mean, we never thought SCA 1 would happen either, but it's a really robust program. There's a lot of communities that use it, and based already on them recently reducing the town's proportion coming forward, that indicates to me that it's a healthy program that they'll still keep around. Now, they may change different pieces of it, but I don't think it's ever going to disappear.
They passed the gas tax that funds that specifically for this program. So it would be hard for them to backtrack on that.
Right.
Not to say they couldn't, but I agree with you that
Right.
it should be robust.
That, and I think also the longevity of the program is probably going to be there because they went from 2 calls a year to 1 call a year. So that's reduced the overall amount that any community can get in 1 year. We had a meeting yesterday with the Haas engineering team, and our concern is we don't want to miss a grant cycle. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure we're in next July
Right.
so that we can keep our projects moving forward. It's nice that we're seeing a reduction from 250,000 on every million to the 200,000 match. At the October 13th town council meeting, you'll have 2 proposals in front of you. One will be for additional engineering cost for additional work on Lakeshore Drive to include survey work that needs to be done for the entirety of this project. And then the second proposal will be our PACER recertification, which is to participate in the CCMG projects. Both of those proposals we should have next week and hopefully off to you in advance of your October 13th. The engineering costs for the Lakeshore Drive project for at least the first year, maybe into the second year, are going to be higher than the latter parts, this third and probably fourth phase, because a lot of the legwork is going to be done up front, your surveys, the overall cost analysis and that. So just don't be shocked when you see your first couple years of engineering, they will be higher than the previous years.
So the
Do you
fact that we've
suggest a
got,
change then, right now, we're levelized in the capital plan for engineering.
I'm sorry.
Right now, right below the light yellow, our Lakeshore Drive engineering is levelized at 200 across the 3 years. Do you
Right.
suggest that we change that?
no, I think if you keep that 400 in there, you're going to have more than enough money to cover the engineering, even if you don't spend the 200 of matching. So I wouldn't take the whole 200,000 matching out right now.
I'd leave
We
it
won't
as is.
spend that 200,000 matching in 26. It'll be part of the project that actually gets paid in 27, but I would hold on to it because right now is to get you guys up to speed on engineering costs, because it's going to be a 4 or 5 or whatever $1 million project over multiple years. The engineering to design it has to occur in the first year. We don't know what that number is. We've asked Haas to give us a better idea. We probably won't know that number until maybe December. Hopefully that number will be available by the time you have to make your ultimate decisions. But I think you ought to hold on to that budget if you follow me. I don't think it's going to be the whole 400 for engineering, but it's probably going to be more than 2 possibly.
Come December, we can adjust,
Yeah.
increase the
Mhm.
engineering and,
Move the match over?
or,
Yeah.
yeah.
And once we get the site survey back, that's going to help guide the project as well. So that's why we want to get that proposal to you at the upcoming meeting. The PACER certification is due to the state of Indiana by December 1st. So we want to get that approved at the October 13th meeting. So it gives Haas time to get that in and get us recertified so that that's no more than $10,000 on that one. But we'll have that ready for you hopefully next week.
Okay.
I think it's really important too. Thank you for saying that when we get these numbers, that we need to have the workshop for the residents. We need to make sure, I know I get beat up, I get told things by, my brother who golfs with people and, Colleen and Joy and probably Cindy that, you say it's on the website. What we know is on the website. So I think that whatever we do, whatever information we get. I think that website just constantly needs to be updated, so it's current to what it is that what's happening at the October 13th.
I think we're out, we're a little out over our skis in terms of public information right now. We don't know ourselves, the numbers. We don't know what you all are going to think about in terms of where the scope needs to be. So you've got people debating things on social media and in conversations throughout the town with very little actual information. So my suggestion to you guys would be to encourage people to wait for this November workshop sort of a thing. But to talk about details at this point, I think is way, way premature. People are all up in arms about width of pavement and all that. Those kinds of decisions are what you're going to have to decide, but you need to decide it with substantial more information than what you have right now.
I agree with that, but yes, I mean, so that can be just our base, continue to say that there will be a workshop, that, there are expenses, just maybe what Kayla has on there, but just to be clear that we make sure that people know there will be a workshop there. They will continue to be advised about what they need to know.
Some good news is on the current roughly $1.3 million CCMG project that we will be closing out in the month of October. For that overall project, a big thank you to Haas Engineering for the overall engineering and the construction management oversight. That entire project is going to be coming in under budget by about $80,000. So
Fantastic.
from what we anticipated and what we applied for with the state of Indiana, we will be $80,000 under that budget. So therefore, it'll be a savings to the town and to the state of Indiana on their 75% match. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Their portion. Yeah. Yeah.
And Sam's working on that closeout. He'll get it to Meg and then we'll get it returned. And,
We'll
but
talk
that's,
to you later, yeah.
like I said, it's a benefit. We're 80,000 under, which is kind of unheard of on municipal projects. So we're very happy with that. So.
Yeah, because it needs to come out you're thinking right.
Yep.
So if there's nothing further on that, if we can move into the park board fund for a moment, then I mentioned already about the tennis court rebuild being in the red font on the capital plan. And again, all of my comments do not at all minimize, please understand, they do not minimize the importance I see in the people that are wanting to do the project. My main goal is, again, to help give the council financial information, good, bad, or otherwise, to be able to help you be best informed to make your decisions. So the Park and Recreation Fund, number 2211 in your financial reports, as of September 30th, has a cash balance of $342,000. They do receive property tax each year. You don't have that financial report in front of you though, Anita. I pulled it up out of Civic really quick.
We're all shuffling.
Sorry. So the current cash balance out of Civic is $342,000. You have a budget prepared based on their submission to you of $228,000 for this next year, 2026 moving forward. And just to give a little bit of context to that, should have pulled my fund projection, that would have been faster. In 24, they spent $156,000, having had a similar budget entered, by the way. The 220-ish budget is pretty standard. In 24, we had budgeted for them 230, and they spent 156. In 23, they spent 152. In 22, 185. And then, we could go on and on in the past. So first of all, It's fantastic that they underspend the budget that's assigned to them. We hope that that happens in every fund, because that is how you're able to presently say you're not at the cliff. So that's fantastic. Within that budget each year, we also budget for them at their request that $80,000 line of capital items. So then they know that within their budget, they've automatically got the 80,000 they can use on a variety of improvements, capital related, outside their operations. This current cash balance of 342 then is before they receive the taxes that the fund will receive coming up in December. And each year, that average is about 200,000. So the bulk of their budgeted amount is covered by the property taxes that are given to them. So a couple things. First of all, the town, as you know, receives the max levy, that fulcrum of the teeter-totter. You as a council are allowed to decide every single individual year which funds receive that levy proportion. The bulk goes to general, makes sense. That's your workhorse. That's where you pay the bulk of your operational things. You contribute some also to the MVH fund, makes sense. Your gas tax is extremely low. You're not allowed to have a wheel tax because you're too small. So you have to give some property tax to that fund to pave your roads. The third fund and last fund that receives property taxes are your park and rec fund. Perfectly fine. You're absolutely allowed to decide that they should get it. Your parks are robust. Over the years, historically, that's what the councils have decided for their residents to help provide that service. Fantastic. There's not a lot of extra revenue other than the fees that they charge for the summer program for the kids that they can generate on their own. It's not, they're not running a lot of various youth sports leagues or, a basketball indoor thing at the Y that's a park department. So they need some property tax to be able to operate what they do. It's your decision, though, as a council, as to what proportion of that levy should they receive, first of all. Again, you're not at the cliff. I'm not suggesting this topic today as something to say that you need to pull back from the park to put it into general. I'm not suggesting that at all. I just want you to know that you have the opportunity to do that at whatever point. If we get to the cliff in 3 years, if nothing changes downstate, maybe that does become a suggestion. We're not there. We are at a point, though, because of the cash balance that they have, that's significant. That's a year and a half's worth of property tax. That is the cash balance right now in the fund. I'm not suggesting you drain it. I'm not suggesting you take it away. I'm just simply suggesting that if the tennis court rebuild is the lower end of the capital plan and you need to finance the rest of the capital plan, they've got cash in the fund. Again, not even suggesting maybe that the whole thing needs. If they can get some donations to cover even part of that and then use some of the cash here that they've got built up, fantastic. We want our funds to build some cash balance over the years so that when you do get a one-off, really great project of improvement for the town, you've got the cash to cover it. That's exactly what I see this cash balance to be, is the availability of their own money that they already have to contribute toward this project if that's approved, as opposed to seeking it from the general fund or trying to squeeze it out of the riverboat fund or the CEDA fund. You need to protect those cash balances for the coming years.
Trista, on some of our cash balances, how are we doing on rotating our CDs? Are we still doing that and every few months?
Well, no, but that's because.
Just curious, because I know we haven't discussed CDs in some.
Right. And Meg, do you want to just go ahead and explain why?
Sure. The percentage that we are receiving from Horizon on all of our cash balances is what we've been doing. So the interest we're generating
Good.
is
In all of our
you
accounts
can
then.
you can look on the projections and see it. Yep.
Good.
All of the funds, not just a chunk of money that we pull out of a handful of funds. So I probably should look again but I do know I get emails on what the rates are, and it's hovered around that 4.25 for the last few months.
Which is good.
So I might add a little more to that. If you remember when the investment conversation was happening, there was a gigantic lump put that maybe was a little bit too much, right? And there was a minute where we were really hoping one matured so the operational money could come back. It worked out fine ultimately. However, as those matured then, I suggested to Megan Council to look at Trust Indiana, which allows almost all of your balance of every fund, like Meg mentioned, to be invested with the state in this particular program. And on a daily basis, then you could pull money back for your operational expenses. Well, when Meg then talked with Horizon and said, we're going to look to draw the majority of our money somewhere different, Horizon said, right, wait a minute, don't go.
I actually had us all set up to do Trust Indiana, but I believe they're also having some, or due to have some consequences from federal,
Rate cuts.
Federal regulations.
yes, at least from what I've read.
So Meg might remember the exact number, but the number that Horizon gave then for interest that they would lock the town in at was only within a couple basis points, like a 0.1 or something, or a 0.2 of Trust Indiana. So it was worth leaving the money here locally. They, of course, have invested in the town over the years, done some different financings with the town. And then Meg wouldn't have to worry about a daily transfer back and forth. And so that small little difference in percentage allowed her to keep all the money here locally. And then with the agreement, then the bank says, yes, the entire balance will earn this higher rate, which is an improvement from before the CDs happened, which was nothing. It was a 0.1% interest on a partial savings or something crazy. So yeah, no CDs, but it's going very well.
Thank you.
When you were talking about the park board and the tennis courts, there was a lot of interest when it first came up about the pickleball courts. There was, people were coming to the park board meetings. They were going to raise funds. They were going to donate. They were going to get grants. They were gung ho to get what they wanted. And then, I don't know, I've been to the last couple of park board meetings and maybe they're still working on that. I think their focus was on these surveys that they were doing, but it seemed to me that that was going to be a big part of the funding of the pickleball courts or additional pickleball.
I do
ball
think
courts.
that's still being worked on.
It's
So-
still being worked on.
The donations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So I know they've held meetings with that residents attended. They've had the workshops for that input. They're compiling the input and then going to keep moving along. If they're going to do a bigger project or do it in stages, they're trying to figure out what residents want. I don't know. There's unanswered questions on what the town would foot for it and what the group of residents very interested in the pickleball upgrades and then other private donations that would contribute to the overall project. So just still unknowns, I think, and I would just wait to hear from the park board as they continue to move along.
Well,
So-
they did talk about at the last meeting, survey, which, they only rolled out a few things, but a lot of it has to do with the coverage that, that's out there. I mean, they pretty much kept everything in that everybody talked about. I think they rolled out the aquatic center, which, is crazy. And I forget what else they rolled out. Quiet space, like, well, the whole park is quiet space, but I was just talking particularly about the pickleball courts because there was, such a
I think they know they
cry
want,
about it.
I think
that
they know
was-
they want to do that project, but the funding sources are yet to be determined.
Okay,
So
I
I
just
think once
wanted
we-
not to lose track of the fact that they were really gung ho on donations and people were gonna get out there and.
I think those individuals are probably on hold until they're told how it's going to happen.
Okay.
So that's
it-
my understanding at least.
It may help them.
He or she could confirm, but
I'm sorry.
And-
It may help them in their fundraising donation goals to know from the council if the council is deciding and willing to keep any on the capital plan, or if the council is deciding that all of the financing needs to come from their own cash balance and donations. If they're, wherever the decision falls in between those two, at some point, maybe a decision along those lines would help the conversation too.
I think before we decide anything, the park board's going to have to show us a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that covers, and Meg, please jump in. That covers what I wanted to make sure we went through in budget, cap plan, all those kinds of things. We have more on the agenda, but what else do you have that? Anything in budget related?
I don't think so. The future capital plan or capital projects we've kind of discussed. So only other item is just the cost of the audit. I suppose I can try to investigate with LaPorte County of when that would what happens. It's just a reduction to our levy that we receive. So we record our full levy, and then we have that cost of the audit that we also record. So whether that would hit next year or the following year, our last audit cost hit our accounts about 4 years after the audit.
Which is,
So
there was a mistake there. That never should happen.
yeah, so I'm hopeful that it doesn't drag. We don't currently have that on the capital plan, but I think just so that everybody's aware, that's one item. And then just the Michigan City Sewer Project, which Trista already alluded to with our rainy day fund, and that hopefully we could get that resolved in the near future. That's all. Any other questions on budget or anything we've discussed so far?
No.
Then we'll move on to the water rate study. We discussed it at a meeting. I'm trying to remember what meeting, but Trista has a spreadsheet that Senator Dalton has been working on, that Trista's been working on. How do you want to proceed with our discussion on this? I can kind of say some of.
But go ahead and give your information, your concerns and that.
So Michigan City is going to increase the rate on what they charge us to purchase water from them. That date is currently unknown. So that will come into play with our timeline of the rate increase that we would like to implement. We would like to implement it January 1st. I know some of you are aware, we've discussed the rate study. It was approved to perform the rate study. That would be our goal, would be to implement an increase of some kind by January 1st of 26. So on the bill that goes to residents is the local capital charge. That's for debt for the pipes under the ground that was taken out 20 years ago. And that's going to finish up within a year and a half. That's when the life of the debt is over. There is an escrow account with some balance in there. I need to find out, it's on my to-do list more towards the end of this year, on how much of that balance can go towards our last payments. So if we can use that balance, then that local capital charge could cease midway into 2025. So along with our costs of capital that we anticipate, we also need to think about when that local capital charge for the debt is finished, whether it's in this year or worst case in a year and a half, how we want the bill to look for residents with what our future capital costs and needs are. So the capital, let's say that local capital charge ends, I would recommend that we put a capital charge, we keep a charge on the resident bills as a separate charge, and that's for infrastructure under the streets, the painting of the water tower, replacement of the water tower. We just got a new generator for vehicles and trucks. this water valve project on Oriole Trail. So our yearly costs that are related to water include water tower insurance and gas and electric at the booster station. I think council probably, maybe I'm jumping into this too quickly, but the question would be, is capital a shared expense that benefits all residents and property owners? We have currently 152 vacant lots. So those lots, I don't know how many there would have been 20 years ago when the debt was figured out, but over time of 20 years, many property owners have, with LaPorte County and through LaPorte County, changed their property lines. So whether they combined a lot for tax purposes, along with that, our town fees would have been dropped. So on a vacant lot, we currently charge fire protection, stormwater, and leaf pickup. So I think council, and through this discussion and through the rate study of what our capital needs are, need to think about, do we want this new capital charge on all Long Beach parcels? There is some language in that ordinance that I sent. And also coming from the rate study, how much capital we're going to need to charge. So on the bill, through the bill, once the debt is finished. So I think some of the items that have come up, for example, when a home is torn down, we've had at least 2 instances where the resident calls and would like their water base charges. So it's not water used because they're not at that time using water anymore, but we've then removed those fees if the house is torn down. Is it appropriate for, again, that vacant lot now, which did have it was improved with a house, then no longer pays for something like capital? This came about, I believe, back in 23 when the vacant lots were discussed. There was an ordinance, and so on a regular bill, there's the water base charge, water usage, then there's the local capital charge that we're discussing. There's also the fire protection, refuse, stormwater. Refuse on a vacant lot, you're not having trash pickup. If you were to then rebuild a home, then we would reinstall your trash charge. So this is just the background of why this is here. I had directed you to section 3 of ordinance, I think it's 2023-06 maybe. I forget the actual number, but section 3 is those rates. So for the water department and the clerk's office, I would just like better consistency going forward when residents call with wanting changes. This ordinance references customers connected to and or using its system as follows. So a change that had been made was that I think it was the fire. It was for improved, or no, it was for all vacant lots. So I think we just need to improve our language on this ordinance to reflect what we decide about the future capital needs. So do you have anything we want to add or questions? Yes, so that ordinance references whether a property has a tap. Does that mean that you're connected to the water lines? So if there's a vacant lot, some of these lots are not buildable. This is kind of also part of, there's a property that just combined, LaPorte County allowed the homeowners to combine their property that the house sits on with a vacant parcel across the street on Lakeshore Drive. So that means Diane and I would drop our charges of fire protection, leaf, and stormwater on that vacant parcel because it's now considered the homestead,
By the county.
correct, by the county. Whereas how we had known it before would be that it would be a congruous lot, that it was connected next door to each other. The county's response was that they are now allowing things that they didn't used to allow. I actually called again yesterday. I had asked if this particular property had gone through the appeal process, and that's why they were allowed to combine like that. She didn't have that answer for me. She thinks that it may have been a precedent that other places in Michigan City along Lakeshore Drive have been allowed to do these types of lot combinations. So it's just something to think of. You know, we don't have, once the debt ends, it's a little different where we're not paying off that debt, but we are collecting the capital for future costs. So again, whenever somebody combined lots in the last 20 years, we lost revenue to pay for that debt. If somebody holds a vacant lot for 20 years and has never contributed towards capital, then they hook up and put up a house, you know, is council and the town okay that they then did not contribute for all those years? So just things to think about as we, and then what else do we want to talk about for the rate
Well,
study?
Kind of tied to that, but the definition for a vacant lot for the water rates doesn't have to be the same definition of a vacant lot for stormwater, right? Because the effect that the land has on that particular service that's provided might be different. So this parcel that the county allowed someone across the street to combine when it's not contiguous is, first of all, crazy to me. I understand it's the same owner, but the definition of a vacant lot for stormwater then, though, still has some huge implications. If it's never going to be buildable at all, then maybe that's a different definition for a water rate, but it just needs to be defined better and really nailed in. Ultimately, the benefit of that is not only to get a little bit more solidly predicted revenue stream, but also that Diane and Meg and the staff there should never be making any decision on whose property changed, do they get some kind of exemption or not? It all should all be governed by the ordinance or have then reviewed by the council because you're now the water board, right? And so if they get a request that's one-off, which happens, right? Who knows what might come up, but then they need to be able to tell the resident, listen, the ordinance says you have to make the appeal to the full council who has to authorize anything changed, any changes to be made. And so that's got to be part of all of this too. We can finalize the rate study not knowing Michigan City's increase. All we know is that it's coming. It's a little bit out of the ordinary because normally to be able to give you the best information for you to decide what your rate should be, we need to know what all the expenses are. We don't think we're going to get that from Michigan City before January. We do have enough information to know operationally within the town itself, based on the current Michigan City rate, that you need a little bit of a small increase just due to inflation over the years and things. It's also a good time to have that study done to make these kinds of changes with the cap charge, the capital charge, so that the future prediction on what's needed to be collected for capital, you know, when are we going to put the replacement of the water tower? If that's 10 years from now versus 3 years from now, it would affect what the capital charge would be if you were wanting it to be a cash payment versus financing. Portions of both directions can happen. So we can finalize, like I said, with what we know now. And I know we had talked before that Maybe it's the communication to the residents that, yes, this is an increase now based on current, but when Michigan City, because we know it's coming, we just don't know when they do increase, you will have to pass that increase on as well. You won't have room sometimes when communities, and I think you've done this years ago in the past, when you're purchasing service from another community, if they have a small increase in their fee, oftentimes the local community just absorbs that. And your cash balance starts to dwindle very slowly because you don't want to pass that on to your residents yet. But it will be this time when Michigan City raises that you are going to have to, you couldn't afford not to pass it on.
And two things to just keep in mind that we've mentioned at meetings discussing this. We have not had a water rate increase in many years. And per Greg, our superintendent, we have, per our auditors that audit our water department, we have some of the lowest cost water in the entire state. So just two things.
I think while you're entertaining your rate increase for the water, you have these other miscellaneous charges, the fire, whatever we call that fire thing, and then the capital charge are, I would call them user fees, I guess. I don't know if that's fair. User fees are one of the areas where you have total control. You can, I mean, it has to be justified, but you have some flexibility in user fee rates in those various categories. The fire one in particular is not sacrosanct. It was an arbitrary thing that the old water board initiated years and years ago. We made a downward adjustment to it in that ordinance that you guys were presented in 2023. You certainly have the ability to define that however you decide to define that, I believe. And if you wanted to jump that up in the context of what's happening with the overall property tax situation, I would recommend to you that you think seriously about maybe keeping those, particularly that capital charge. We've had this discussion before. That's a water capital charge, but that fire protection charge could be redefined and you could bump that up a little bit just to accumulate some funds in the event that the lit tax that Mark talked about diminishes at some point. We've been counting on that we use that as justification for what we did for the projections for the public safety building, for instance. We assumed that lit tax of that 227 or so was going to continue to come in. If that doesn't continue to come in, that's another area where some of those defined, what am I calling it?
Expenses.
The fund that we just talked about, the little items, you could jump that up a little bit to accumulate some funds to counteract that. But the time to do it, I think, is while you're doing this. So you don't have to think about it 2 years from now and say, oh, wait, let's go find some source of revenue.
Mhm.
I think it'd be appropriate right now. Get your water where it belongs. Maybe bump that fire one up, define it however you want to define it, and maybe hold on to some of that capital charge so that you're accumulating some funds. Yeah.
And it is appropriate to pay, as I mentioned already, clerk staff, for example, out of some of these several funds that receive these extra fees. It's a revenue generator for the town in the sense that it's revenue outside of your general fund property taxes. It's not meant to make you a profit, but it is within your right, as John was saying, to set the fees at a level that cover the expenses that you have, you having decided what those expenses are. So if more of Meg's salary should be attributed to water instead of the general fund, because she does oversee Diane and the billing and all of that. If some of Mark's salary should come into water because he does oversee those guys, perfectly within your right. Now, are we going to pay half of Mark's salary out of water? No, that's not really justifiable. But some, and it's within the civic bookkeeping software that we could do that. And I think that would be somewhere to look as we're faced with these downstate issues, when we're trying to free up some of that general fund a little bit for the things that have to stay there. This is an area as the utility that you have some flexibility to do that. So
So what could our timeline be then? So rates implemented Jan 1, or new rate, I should say.
Yeah.
So that's by November
Well, even if
meeting.
November meeting, maybe it's a 2 reading situation so that you have some time for public input. Maybe it's a November and December meeting that you would vote in December. With though, some communication to the public ahead of time that this is being discussed and that the vote may not happen until middle of December with rates effective in January. There is no deadline that you have to have rates effective for 30 or 60 or 90 days before they're charged. That's just based on your own schedule. But you certainly don't want only 2 weeks notice. I think maybe having the study drafted for the October meeting to review it, some opportunity maybe to ask a few questions, and then have it as an official ordinance on the agenda for November would give time for you all to review, to think, have some public outreach, make sure that this vacant lot definition can be well drafted with Chris based on the way that you all want it. That's a 6-week lead time for that part. But the rate study itself is all framed out, the skeletons here. It's just a matter of adding in these last couple little pieces. If you want me to suggest part of Mark's salary being included, I can do that. And you can see where it's at. We can always take some expenses back out if you think the rate jump is too high. So why don't I include a small portion to start with, and then you can see where it lands then from there. Okay.
Good.
The other part of the capital charge quickly is, Meg, you ready for me to mention this now? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. As you know, when the bond, the SRF bond through the state was first started 20 years ago, the town was also required to start an escrow fund. So that if in case the town ever was not able to make its semi-annual debt service payment, the payment in January is always just interest only, so it's real small. The principal portion is then paid one time a year in July 1. So over the first 5 years of the loan, from 05 to 10, well, 09 technically, you had to contribute some extra to build up that escrow fund so that it could cover the minimum of, I think, a debt service payment. So it had to have over 300,000 in it. It has then earned interest this whole entire time on its own accord. And the current balance in that fund alone is over $380,000. The town could have been asking that the interest it earned be applied back to the water fund's operational fund, but it just didn't. And so interest has been accumulating, and then it, of course, earned interest on interest, and so that's all fine. The sinking fund also then is held by BNY, and that fund has also been earning interest. The sinking fund is the fund that BNY uses so that when the clerk treasurer goes to make the bond payment, Bank of New York Mellon is the trustee. They're the intermediary. So they get the town's money and then they pay all the bondholders. So every 6 months then, they pay whether it's the interest payment or the principal and interest payment out to the bondholders. And because interest has been earning there, that fund also now has more money than it would be required to be holding right now. Because of those things, when the town, and we make a monthly payment to them, which is an SRF rule through the state's program, we pay 1/12 every month of what the total annual debt service is going to be. When we make that monthly payment in October, here next month, based on all the other money that's held in the balances, you actually will have enough in those two funds to cover the rest of the debt service through July 1 of 27. there's already 260,000 in the sinking fund, which covers the 250 that's due next July, and interest this coming January. And then the escrow fund would take over the other 50,000 and then make the very last payment in July of 27. So what Meg mentioned earlier was talking with the trustee to coordinate and ensure that we can stop making the payments after October, first of all. And that the rest of the cash then will just be used. As that cash though sits and earns more interest, right now, if it earned not another penny, you would have a refund coming back of about $17,000. I can't predict and should not predict for you what interest will be December of 2026. So we're not going to make that kind of a calculation, but you'll be getting some money back. If you chose to, you could continue to make the monthly payment all the way through 2027. And then the refund basically that you get at the end would be much larger. I don't personally see, nor does our firm suggest, that you continue to pay just to build that balance up, and then you don't have that money in your flow of funds. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But we do need to confirm with the trustee that they will accept us to stop that payment in October. That payment then, that monthly payment, comes from the capital charge we're talking about on the rate study. So circling back then to finish all of this, it's okay to still charge the capital fee until such time as you change your water rate ordinance to be effective January 1. Even if you don't pay the monthly fee to BNY in November, December, that capital charge the residents pay is going to be in the cash to pay for future capital. It's not that the money disappears, and it's not inappropriate to continue to accept that charge even if you're not paying it to BNY for this couple months that you're getting this finalized. I don't know, any questions about that? Okay. And we can double check with BNY if he needs something signed by council to recognize that the cash balance is sufficient. If he needed because of the SRF loan, maybe he would need a certificate from us to say it's kind of a separate procedure that we do sometimes with bonds to show that the revenue stream in the current cash is sufficient to fund the upcoming debt expense. We could give him this little spreadsheet that we already have, and it would satisfy what they need. So we certainly, if he needs documentation, we can help get whatever that would be.
So then we would take that rate study and decide is $10 of capital or $5 what we need.
To build for the future, yeah.
Okay. And thinking about, does that capital charge then apply to all parcels or just improved parcels? So things that council needs to think about.
Okay,
So
So we'll
Mark,
keep-
do you?
we'll
oh,
keep
go ahead.
trudging. I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, we'll keep trudging along on that. And then the leaf? The leaf?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So after discussion with Mark and Mark's discussions with the street department, and again, included in our capital discussion is the leaf garbage fund, which, as you recall, we had increased the garbage fee mostly due to the fact that the fee that Republic was charging us was set to increase for, again, the first time in a while for this current year, for 25, 26, and 27. So we had to implement those cost increases to residents, and we also thought through our capital needs. So similarly with the leaf side of that fund, it is a combined fund, but Mark went through capital item needs. And so we're in the preliminary stages here of, again, as part of this overall, what is the bill going to look like is a potential leaf increase. So Mark, do you want to?
Sure, I can, I can kind of walk you through the spreadsheet they have in front of you. So the 2025 cost analysis that we have, this spring, we spent $5,000 for 1 week of leaf collection. The fall collection will begin on November 1st. We have a $50,000 contract for that. That fee has not increased, I've been told, for about the last 7 years. I forecast that to increase in the near future. The leaves, once they are hauled back to the town yard, have to then be removed to a certified composting site that'll compost all the town's leaves. The waste disposal for the spring is $5,000 annually, $18,000 in the fall. Annually, we spend in upwards of $20,000 for repairs and related parts for our 3 leaf vacs. Fuel-related costs in the spring are approximately $4,000, and fuel expense are roughly $8,000 in the fall. Employee payroll annually, this would include clerical staff, myself, and then the public works team, any of their related time that they spend to assist the outside vendor that assists with the collection is roughly $25,000. Currently, we are billing for 1,237 homes, which brings in a year-to-date revenue of $148,440. The expenses that we just discussed total $135,000. That leaves us with an ending capital balance of roughly $13,440 a year. And speaking to our street superintendent, Tom Dolph, we would like to see that ending amount more around the $70,000 plus range, which would allow us over a period of 5 years to build up approximately $350,000 in capital. And that would cover the cost of new leaf machines, increased cost in operational cost, and then also any trucks, payloader expenses. Our payloader alone is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the cost to repair or replace that would be quite costly to the town. So the box below is the proposed 2026 fee adjustment based on the 1,237 homes. If we were to increase by $5 per month, would bring in a net revenue of $222,660 for the year. When you reduce the current annual expenses, that would bring us a projected net gain into the capital side of roughly $74,220 per year. There was discussion, do we increase by $3 a month? Do we increase by $5 a month? After having quite a few conversations with the street superintendent, his recommendation, and I will affirm I agree with that, is $5 a month, passing that on to our residents for the service that we provide with the leaf collection is a fair increase and would allow us to have some capital to cover the town's expenses into the future. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, give further explanation. But that's kind of where we're at.
No questions.
We did
Are-
not increase the leaf rate when you increased garbage last year. At that time, we left that steady, for what that's worth.
I think Dan Healy does a great job. I think they really are quick. They come back, they're around. I mean, one year I was talking to them while they were picking things up and the guys behind knocked down my mailbox I mean, he came back the next, that afternoon, I think. I said, I'll do it. I've got,
Yeah.
you know, my own, but I just think he provides a really great service, so I'd hate to lose him.
The thing to keep in mind are those capital needs. And if we can save up with this planning where we don't have to take out debt when we need these
Mhm.
large pieces of equipment replaced, it really does save us money in the long run. So
Just the 3 leaf vacs alone, and they are all of age. Each one of them is $60,000 to $70,000 to replace. So just for the 3 of them alone, we're looking at $210,000 to replace. It would take us, 3 years in the capital gains revenue side just to replace those 3 machines. And one of them will need a replacement here in the next year to 2 for certain, because we put quite a few parts in it this year just to get it ready for this leaf season. So,
And those are what get damaged with the sticks and things. I
the
mean,
pumpkins and all the good stuff.
hopefully
that,
people,
Gearheads.
yeah, are getting better. I don't know. I still see things piled up. Maybe Dan is getting better with his guys about not picking them up or not.
I think it's a combination. I think we've
Yeah.
done well of relaying to residents.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
know I myself get sticks out of my own pile, just as I got educated.
Right, yeah.
The newsletter that goes out next week, there'll be an article in the newsletter covering the do's and don'ts with leaf collection as well. Tom's recommendation is that we look at 2026 January starting this increase. So I think we'll have it on the council agenda for October 13th for discussion and consideration. Would be the recommendation.
And then Mark, did you want to discuss your other handouts? I think that's our last item.
Yeah, just real quick, I know a lot of information was shared this week on grant opportunity with the Homeland Security, Port Security Grant that the council respectfully gave us the permission to utilize $4,000 in our donation fund to engage Lexipol to apply for the grant for a new police boat. As everyone is aware, our current boat, July 4th, blew an engine while heading out on patrol. We did apply back in August for the Port Security Grant. We were informed at the time, don't be disappointed if you're not successful, that most towns and cities are not successful on their first and sometimes second application. And Sunday morning, Meg and I both woke up to a email that we were both quite excited about. In fact, Meg was texting me within minutes of her opening the email, and we were both in disbelief that we were very successful in receiving a $228,000 grant, of which 170 of it will be grant funds, and then the remainder, 56,800 and some dollars, is 25% matching funds. And our goal at the police department is to not burden the town with the matching funds. That we've reached out to corporate sponsors and residents, and to date we are right around $40,000 in community matching funds. So we're shy of about $16,000 that we're hopeful to raise in the next week, so that we can inform you at your upcoming council meeting that the new police Marine unit will be zero cost to the community. So between grants and in-kind donations. And then also I'm working on an annual grant with the state of Indiana with the Department of Natural Resources up to $10,000 a year. Don't hold me to this because it's no guarantee, but the state does have a fund that provides for fuel, training, overtime, and equipment for Marine units that operate on Lake Michigan. I was in contact with the Department of Natural Resources, Commander Sean Brown this week. We've had several discussions. He's put me in contact with the major down at the State House in Indianapolis, and I'm currently working on trying to secure additional funds for the town for 2026. So that's kind of where we're at. A lot of good news. We're excited. The boat, as in the packet, you'll see it's a lot of it's guaranteed, warranted for 5 years. So, maintenance concerns and that'll be typical oil changes and preventative maintenance. But otherwise, pretty much for the first 5 years, the boat should be pretty self-sustained. Another good thing about getting the port security grant, worst case scenario, 5 years from now, we blow an engine in this boat. The DNR shared with me this week that they submitted to the port security grant this year for 2 new engines for one of their vessels, and that the port security grant also will provide grants for maintenance concerns on vessels that were awarded in previous grants. So there's that opportunity as long as the grant stays available, that down the road, let's just say the grant's still there 10 years from now and we have an engine that goes, that possibly we could get grant funds to replace the engine, which unfortunately our current boat has a blown engine and it was estimated at, I think, $36,000 to repair. And we opted not to repair it because we were applying for this grant. And we're going to be asking you at your October 13th meeting permission to auction off the current boat, which we're hopeful will bring in a couple $1,000s as well. That'll go towards the purchase of the new one.
I think just talking to you and Mitch Seitz yesterday quickly, it's interesting how, you talk about a grant, but just how detailed that the grant was when they talked about, we talk about safety on the beach, right? That we're a beach community, but you went into detail about different, the tour boat there, the boat that goes out. What if something happened with that Michigan City has a dive team, that there's all kinds of other things that don't just involve Long Beach and our residents swimming or, a jet ski accident or something. So, appreciated that a grant isn't just an easy thing to do. It involved a lot of work. So.
No, thank you. Yes. And you're correct. I mean, Sergeant Seitz, Kayla, Corporal Farthing, Deputy Disbro, even Deputy Vope had all of us pulled together, thought of creative ways that we could pull numbers from all across the shoreline from Michigan City to the state line. We used all the major infrastructures from NIPSCO to the water intake, Blue Chip Casino, which is on the harbor as well. We used Blue Chip Casino. We listed that in the grant, that if something major was to happen to the riverboat casino being Blue Chip, that worst case scenario, we could take the boat into the harbor to help there as well. So all those things were listed. It was a lot of work. I will say that we spent several weeks every morning coming in, talking about, what are we going to put into the grant? How are we going to answer these questions? Working with the Lexipol team. And then the Lexipol team was phenomenal. I would recommend them. That was the best $4,000 we ever spent. And we're going to be reimbursed. Just shy of 2,000 of that comes back. We were able to ask for reimbursement for the cost of the grant application, which was the 4,000 Lexipol. So I think we're going to get about $1,850 of the 4,000 back as well. So it was all good news.
Thinking about that one for a few minutes.
Great job, Chief, you and your whole team. Thank you so much.
With that, so question, my thoughts on the boat for the October 13th meeting. I almost wonder if we should do a resolution. And Trista, your thoughts on that, since it's such a large expenditure? Do we do a resolution to kind of memorialize the grant, accepting the
authorization to
grant?
purchase?
Yeah.
That would be based on your purchasing policy ordinance, which I don't recall if you even have one. And it might have been one of the things that the audit had said we need to have. I think it's a good idea. It certainly can't hurt anything at all to have council approve the expenditure through the use of the grant, both for the grant paperwork, just to show every loophole was thought of and covered, as well as just to cover any future audit
Yeah, because we have to set up a GSA government account for purchasing because the quote that we were provided, which had to be used for the grant application, if we are not a GSA account, this boat costs the town $7,000 more. So we need to set up a GSA account, and I think the resolution will help for future reference then that we have it outlined how we secured the funds, that the matching funds will all come from the police donation account through in-kind community donations and that, and then it's all outlined in the resolution. So that'd be my recommendation to the council to do it.
It also should authorize the creation of a new fund that you can call whatever you want, but maybe police boat grant fund or something. We'll figure out maybe something better, but because the grant money, when you receive it, should go into this dedicated fund on its own. The state board would look later to see that that grant money was kept completely separate from everything else. When it's spent on the purchase, of course, that portion comes out for the purchase.
The vendor this morning, Fluid Patrol Boat, we contacted them. We've got, after we accept the boat, we have 30 days from delivery to make full payment. And then prior to that, once the council and the grant gives us permission to move forward, we just have to submit on town letterhead authorization to move forward, signed by the town council president, authorizing us to move forward with the purchase of the vessel. So, but yeah, so I'd recommend that maybe Meg and I work with Chris to try and get this resolution put together for your meeting.
So we'll get that on the agenda.
Correct.
Thanks.
Mark might have already asked. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, Meg.
No, that was all. Just that it will be on the agenda. Joy was wondering.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else,
Good
at
work,
11:21 PM.
Public
Thank you,
service
everyone.
announcement, October 1st starts breast cancer awareness.
It does.
If you or someone you know has not recently been tested, please do so. It will save their life.
Thank
Should
you,
save their
Trista.
life.
Thank you.
Men included. You can still get it as well. I know we don't like to talk about it. But if you have family history, talk to your doctor.
Thanks, Trista.